now it's time to sort of try to do a recap of what's happened over the last 48 hours. So I invite to the panel our final roundtable, Kata, Dr. Erol Mujanovic, Duncan Parker, Hilary Matson, and Nadine Pinto. Could you please come up? I'll come over.
Are you joining the round table?
You coming up? Come on up. I'll come over here. Right. So, Kata, I'm going to start with you. And you and I were on a panel too. Bottom line is your takeaway, and we can be short about this, but your takeaway from what you heard this week, these last 2 days. Now, of course, we were talking about aviation. We were talking about sustainable airplane fuel. We were talking about all sorts of innovations, right, in design, implementation, cost. Your takeaway.
You do ask the tricky questions, or very long questions.
Yes.
And I have tried to think about this. I've been in this room for most of the last 2 days, and it really has been a fruit cocktail of all sorts of different aspects. So it's difficult to distill down to one key takeaway. Sort of the economist in me likes to try and structure things. So I've really tried to put a bit of structure around what has been the key takeaway for me. And I will refer back to the panel that I was on yesterday on finance. The takeaway really for me has been reinforced that there isn't a shortage of money. I don't think money is the problem. What there seemed to be a significant mismatch of is whether it's people who want to produce sustainable fuels and people who want to buy sustainable fuels. Or we also saw that there's sometimes a mismatch between people who would like to invest in travel and tourism and people who are looking for funding. And I think probably the most significant mismatch, which is often at the heart of most of these problems, is the mismatch between the tourists who are paying their funds and spending their time looking for enjoyment and the societies and the workers who are providing those. And to me that mismatch is at the heart of some of the biggest challenges that we're trying to solve. So there's no shortage of money, there's no shortage of solutions, but there are some really difficult challenges. And frankly, I'm not sure that I'm much more optimistic at the end of this conference. I don't want to start on a downer, but I don't think we've made a huge amount of progress towards solving some of those really intractable challenges. I know you'll ask, well, what are the solutions? And I think this is at this point, when we're dealing with such significant market failure, that is when institutions have to step in. So I really do think there's a stronger role for governments to provide the right conditions for these market failures to be fixed.
So your takeaway is self-governing is not really working too well. You're waiting for government to solve it?
In very simple terms, yeah.
That's a little disappointing. You're agreeing?
Partly. I think my major takeaway is the word purpose. And I think through partnerships and collaboration, we have to, both government, business, so public and private, have to have a purpose. We have to agree a goal of where we're going. And I think what we see globally, and I find it very interesting, you invited an English chap onto the stage. I'm not sure we should have an opinion on anything in the world at the minute. But I see in my country that without purpose, we get blown around in the wind. When a storm comes, our rudder, no one's at the helm, no one's holding the wheel. And so public opinion, which I think was expressed on the stage in the journalism part just before, we just get blown around and we head off. And where I can become really optimistic is if we can agree a purpose that A, there's a problem, B, there are solutions now or coming, that was kind of a big takeaway for me, that lots of people are working on something over there, so we need some sticking plasters in between, but we need to go there. But it's all about having that vision, having that purpose. Where are we going? Because humans are incredible. We can put people on the moon. We can look at the transformation of the world over the last few thousand years. We're incredible. We can do this, but we have to have a purpose and not get blown around in the wind.
And at the same time, going back to something that you said, we talk about what we're trying to do to save it, what we're trying to do to preserve it, and then we let technology in the door another way, and now we're trying to develop another supersonic transport, right? Which I understand it. I was lucky enough to fly the Concorde, but what was the Concorde? It was 14 separate fuel tanks, right? And the only role of the flight engineer on that plane was to move fuel from one tank to another to maintain the center of gravity so it wouldn't crash. Now they're developing another supersonic transport, which is, do we need that? Is that really progress? And first of all, they can't even find an engine to do it. Second of all, what's the fuel consumption going to be? And most importantly, who's going to fly it, right? Only the super wealthy? Are we back to private aviation again? So, I mean, that certainly to me is like, that discussion's not really happening.
Well, I think it is happening. I think that's a very interesting conversation that I'd love to follow up with you afterwards. There's a saying that sometimes comes up, which was sort of the scientists were so busy figuring out if they could, they didn't worry about whether they should. And I think boom is, let's name it, and boom's the most high-profile one, falls into that category. I think it's phenomenal technology. As you say, humans are incredible, we can do anything. But should we? I mean, I think, I'm not sure that question is being asked, and that's sort of why, and I said I'm generally an optimistic person, but these are really fundamental market failures. And we're paying the price. I mean, let's call it what it is. We have not been paying for the externalities that we've enjoyed for the last 100 years. That's what it is, and that's why we're now playing catch up. So I think it's and that's absolutely fixable. I see solutions all the time.
Right.
But we are coming from the back foot. We're not ahead. We shouldn't be patting ourselves on the back.
Well, then that raises the question. Another definition of terms question. What's the definition of the word futurist? Because can't we deal with presentist, right? That's what we're talking about right now, right? So going back to your somewhat depressing analysis, what can we fix that we're in control of now?
There's a whole host of things we can fix. We can use the technologies that are available, make best use of them. So it's already been picked up. Where there are lower impact solutions available, they should be taken up wholeheartedly. And my aviation colleagues might not like this, but I'm actually a big supporter of switching to rail and other options where that makes sense. But we also have to recognize that for long-haul travel, if we believe the value of that, then the only technology available is sustainable fuels. And I know Ufi's not around, and she asked the question earlier about how much is it going to cost. Well, ICF knows how much it's going to cost because we wrote the report that went to IATA. It's $1 to $1.5 trillion for the infrastructure to make enough SAF. So there is information out there. The failure is the mismatch of the information to the recipients. So I really don't want to monopolize because I know there's really good other takeaways, but there are lots of things that can be done, from the very micro personal decisions to the much more blanket, let's mandate X, let's compel, let's do blanket. And I'm really encouraged by the ICAO resolution for the long-term aspirational goal. A lot of great associations are being set up, and this event itself is a testament to it. I picked up on this the other day. This is an exercise in knowledge sharing, and I think that's wonderful. That hasn't been happening nearly enough because people have been so competition-driven, ego-driven, and frankly just trying to outcompete the next person. So I am encouraged, but I don't underestimate the challenge. The challenge is phenomenal, and we need all of the brains and all of the funds to make progress.
So the two words would be common ground. Mm-hmm. Looking for it.
That's a good one.
Erol, part of what you do is about growth and investment. What's your takeaway from this?
I heard a lot of interesting information, and it reminded me actually a complexity of even speaking and even of the concept of sustainability here. And it's an evolving concept. While we are finding solutions, other problems will arise. So the question is, will we ever solve that?
Well, you can't look at it one-dimensionally.
Yeah, exactly, definitely. And it's definitely also a multi-decade process. Really, this type of deep changes, multi-dimensional changes that are taking place, it takes long time. For me today, for example, I got interesting takeaway on the panel where we discussed that employers are these that would need to make more efforts in the really short term in order to attract talents, in order to retain, even to find sufficient number of employees, because we heard a lot of different shortages of the workforce across the world, across the sub-industry. And the second biggest and most interesting takeaway for me, I think half of panels and discussion that I attended at least, they mentioned lack of communication, be it between sub-industry, sub-sectors, be it within different countries, etc. So it's very, very interesting. And there are a lot of sometimes simple things to do, but somehow we don't manage to do them. Some of them are more complex, but these are a couple of takeaways for me.
You mentioned workforce. How about sustainable workforce? Because what the pandemic did, beware the law of unintended consequences, is it allowed the world, it wasn't a particular area, to reassess their lot in life, to reassess their role, their standard of living, their cost of living, their job versus their profession. And so we saw unbelievable mobility at that point. People, migration, if you will, resignation and migration, which took the rule book and threw it out. Right? Everybody who was in HR, I don't even know why they even have a job anymore, because it completely redefined everything, correct?
Very true. So that's why I thought completely new paradigm there is needed also. So it's more of change of simple facts or rule book, as you said, but really much more somehow also humanity and respect towards the employee will be needed. A few colleagues pointed out today that tourism industry was one of those that was close to exploiting some people in some areas, okay?
Oh, they weren't close to it. They were doing it.
Yeah, so these are things that a lot of people won't be tolerating anymore, and just as you pointed out rightly.
Well, you know what? It gets down to job versus profession. And I know I'm generalizing. I apologize in advance. But if I go to dinner in a restaurant or a cafe in Italy, there's a reasonably good chance that the waiter or the waitress, it's not their job, it's their profession. It's something that they did, maybe their father or mother did before them. They like what they do. In other parts of the world, it's not a profession. It's a low-paying job that the person who is the waiter or the waitress is an out-of-work actress waiting to leave, right? So the catalytic moment for them was the pandemic, right? But now the travel industry has it. If they've never had a responsibility before, they certainly have it now, not to mention an obligation to redefine what those occupations are, to make it a profession and not a job, with the appropriately wage, benefits, environment, housing, and a sustainable approach to that work environment. And that hasn't been done yet. Agreed?
Totally agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Hilary,
Hi.
what is your takeaway from this week?
I have a few. I'll start on a positive note for everyone. One thing that I did hear,
So there.
I'm just, I'm buttering everybody up. One thing that I did hear throughout many of the panels was, at least we all agree that collaboration is needed, which is a super basic starting point, but it's a starting point. And we know that the problems, whether it's climate or protecting culture or protecting biodiversity, they cannot be resolved in silo. So we agree on that, and that's a good thing. Where I want to go deeper into is, what does that mean at each level? And I honestly don't know if this is going to be controversial or not, but I think it's like one of the biggest and greatest marketing scams of present day, that so much of fixing this feels like it falls on the consumer. We need to eat less meat. We need to not use plastic straws. We need to carbon offset our flights. When individuals are not causing most of these problems, like, we can't change it on that small of a level. So we need to think top down, how do we move the needle? And I also want to pause, because I do not want that to be confused with we shouldn't be doing things. Like, we absolutely should not be, we should be eating less meat. We should be offsetting our flights. I do that. We should all be doing that. But it's not going to save the world, right? Realistically. So if we need to be more carbon neutral, there needs to be government regulation. There needs to be an incentive for companies, for big companies, for airlines. Most companies are not thinking about triple bottom line. Most of us in this room probably are. We're in a bit of an echo chamber, hopefully. But if you're not thinking about triple bottom line, the way to motivate and to incentivize is financially. If a company is not going to prioritize something that's going to reduce shareholder value, even if it's better for the environment, you have to make them do that. So that was another theme that I kind of heard through some of these sessions was the carrot versus the stick. How much do you try to nudge people and subtly change behavior? And at what point do we say, you know what, it's already too late, we're way behind, nobody is moving urgently enough, we have to act faster, and let us just kick this into high gear by putting regulations and incentives in place, starting with governments and companies, subsidizing smaller companies. I run a sustainable travel company, we're carbon neutral. Does that matter in the grand scheme of things? It's leading by example, but it's not moving the needle. We help our travelers carbon offset. So I think we need to think about, yes, there is individual action that can be taken. Yes, small companies should be leading by example, but bigger companies and governments, we need to have more action and faster, and we need to work together, but it needs to come from the top down.
Well, this is echoing what you and I were just talking about, because I go back to the automobile industry. How many people died in crashes before they made you wear seatbelts? Right? It's as simple as that. And the manufacturers did not want to install seatbelts because it would increase the cost of their production by about $9, right? That was it, right? The famous Ford Pinto case where the gas tanks were exploding was because Ford didn't want to spend 25 cents on a fix they already knew they could make, right? That's criminal negligence. And we're bordering on criminal negligence based on what you're saying if the corporations are not doing what they're supposed to do and then blaming it on the consumers to take individual responsibility. I think that's a good takeaway.
But just the parallel to that on the aviation side, I mean, exactly what you said. I mean, what would compel one individual airline to pass through the cost of completely offsetting their flights or buying or as much SAF as they possibly could? What would that mean? In practice, that would mean their average ticket price would go up $15, as an example, ballpark. That means that 90% of the price-sensitive customers would switch to the next cheapest alternative. Immediately, we see that.
She's absolutely right.
It's sort of bordering in the naive to suggest that an individual profit-maximizing company will do that because, yeah, the shareholders are not going to be happy about it.
And human behavior is such, and you're absolutely right, if you increase or decrease the price of a ticket by $5, the needle moves. It moves, and they'll just move away from it.
Right, all the data support it. So I absolutely, that's where I started, and that's probably where I'll end, is that you have to intervene when there is an evident market failure.
Then where's the initiative, and where's the push for government to do that?
Well, it's happening. I mean, let's think about, again, what motivates who? Politicians are responding to voter needs, at least in principle, right?
Drop the principle right now.
But I mean, look, we started with flight shaming. Within 5 years, we have a mandate for SAF uptake in Europe. We have policies that prioritize rail travel over flying. This has happened in a relatively short space of time in response to actually some quite positive media coverage reflecting on the previous session and an expression primarily from the younger generation that this is not acceptable. The status quo has not served us well. Do something. The protests are working. It might not feel like they're working overnight, but what that means is that as of 2025, 26, there will be a law in Europe to say that 2-3% of your fuel has to be SAF. We still now have to solve how we produce enough, but that is now pushing things. It is happening, but this is only Europe. It's not happening elsewhere.
Errol?
Yeah, going just on another side of those incentives, I heard here a number of discussion as consumers. Lots of people would like to see higher up in the ranking or on the marketplace such Expedia, seeing hotels or other places that are supporting and having sustainable one or more elements, be it cleaner energy, be it having local food for local producers.
But let me be devil's advocate. You talk to the Expedia guys, they'll tell you what's preferential placement all about. People pay for that, number one. Number two, it's price driven, right? And the biggest problem right now in pricing of hotels is that there's no transparency, meaning they'll quote a price but not quote the resort fee and everything else. So you're initially drawn to the lowest price, right? Same thing if you're trying to book an airline ticket. The lowest price comes up first. What you don't see is a 6-hour flight's actually 33 hours with 16 stops, right? But people pay attention to the price. So what's the financial incentive, or let's flip it, the financial consequence to make them do that, to make it do it the right way? And that's the question, right? I mean, without that, yes, Hilary.
Well, one thing that I worry about is playing through this scenario in my head is like, what if What if airlines were forced by the government, were regulated by the government and said they had to be carbon neutral, and they just pass off those costs to consumers by making it a higher flight or a higher cost? What if there's not an option to opt out? What if the lowest option is a carbon offset flight? I think part of that is good, but my problem with that is that it's still putting it back on consumers just in kind of a sneakier way. And so it comes back to these companies that are out there to make money, and the only way that they're going to actually absorb those costs is if they have a financial incentive, like maybe reduce taxes, maybe, I don't know what the answer is.
So you're looking for government subsidies so that it's not passed on to the consumers?
Yeah, and to go...
Which results in higher taxes, which consumers pay. I just thought I'd mention that.
And I'm aware. I mean, we can kind of go in circles, but like the change, it has to happen from somewhere. And right now, some airlines have an option to add carbon offsets, but not all. That's another thing. Like in theory, that could be a requirement at an airline level that says you need to at least give your customers an option to add carbon offsets onto their flight. Another thing they could regulate or mandate is say, if a customer checks this box to offset your flight, you as the airline is going to match that so that you're both doing something. There's so many things that could be happening, but very, very few airlines are actually even giving that option, much less doing anything as a company.
Duncan?
Wow, that's a lot of stuff, isn't it? My brain's fizzing on all of that, trying to decide whether I agree or disagree with you, Hilary.
Well, do you?
To some extent, but I suppose that the opposite of that I was thinking is that, and I'm personalising this a little bit, maybe I should pay more. And maybe I should therefore do less. So travel less but do one thing well. So one of the kind of takeaways I've heard, or the themes maybe, is better quality, not quantity. I think with budget airlines, with rising middle class wages that we have, more of us have been able to travel more and incredibly privileged.
But what you're suggesting flies right in the face of that business model.
It does, and I'm so that's why I was mulling it over before I answered and listening to what Hilary had said there. So I think it's probably again a partnership that yes, I should pay more. Yes, I think government should subsidise. Yes, I think businesses need to and their shareholders need to redefine what value means. What is the purpose of our business? Is our business to return financial returns to our shareholders or to our founders or whoever maybe our investors? And I don't think it's happening today. I don't think it's going to happen tomorrow. But I think there's a near future purpose revolution where customer demand, supplier push, government incentives will make that happen. We're seeing it in supermarkets. Tesco's very recently published their own vision, their purpose, their North Star, if you like, on the sustainability agenda. And they said to every single supplier, if you want to provide our staff uniforms, if you want to put food on our shelves, if you want to package product, if you want to, your fleet, etc., etc., etc. And this isn't a company I'm holding up high saying, these are the angels of the world. But they're saying it to their suppliers and saying, if you want to earn money from us, here are the promises we've made the world, you keep them. And I think that that's probably the way that the world's going in every industry and being held to account. And I think travel will get there.
Then you're talking really about a dramatic change from return on investment to return on intelligence.
It's true. We heard very much that money is seeking smart homes at the minute. There's the Sustainable Development Goals. It's suggested we have to spend $3 to $4 trillion US a year to hit those 17. And obviously, all the things we've been talking about, sustainability, that's the scorecard right there. 3 to 4 trillion from government aid and from philanthropic aid globally, we raise about 350 billion US dollars. That gets us 10% of the way there. If we can divert less than 1% of global financial assets, less than 1% into good things, into impact, we achieve the development goals. And I can't think of any industry that's better placed to do that than the travel industry. Whether it's saving some ecology, whether it's bringing wealth, shifting wealth from one place to another. We can do that. And we've just got some problems on the way through, but I think we can do that.
On that note, Duncan, we'll close it. Thank you so much. Please thank our panel. Come on, thank them.